Philly Sports Jabronis. I'm Joe Dara, along with Zach Turtell. This is the Survivor Football Manifesto podcast for Week 3 of the 2024 NFL season. And yeah, we are actually following through and having a Week 3 Survivor Football Manifesto podcast here, even though the first 2 weeks have basically, for lack of a better word, been a bit disastrous for those of us who follow the Manifesto, and certainly for those of us who talk about trying to follow the Manifesto. So we're going to get right into it here pretty quick. Maybe have a little bit of a whining session, but start to pick our heads up here and talk about what we like for Week 3 based on some of the guidance that we get for the Week 3, and moving onward range of the season based on the Manifesto. So just to give folks a bit of a refresher who may not have heard our first two podcasts for this season in its entirety for the Manifesto, we're pointing the finger at you, the Cincinnati Bengals and Baltimore Ravens predominantly as teams that have really kind of let us down for picks that we felt strongly about for Survivor, and that's all I'll say about that. And then I'm going to kick it here to Zach just to see, Zach, maybe can you add a little color to this here, because right now I'm starting this podcast off with a rant, which I really didn't want to do, but here I am doing it. So I'm going to kind of kick it to you to just try to settle me down a little bit.
I mean, we're far from the only ones who like the Ravens coming off a loss to beat the Raiders at home when they were 0-1. So it's kind of what I'm trying to tell myself. But I did see a stat. So actually, the Bengals were Week 1 against the Patriots were actually like the biggest favorite Week 1, and the Ravens were actually the biggest favorite according to Vegas lines Week 2. I think it was since 1980. That was the last time that the two biggest favorites the first 2 weeks of the season lost. So I'm trying to tell myself that, like, this is such an outlier. We haven't had a season like this in over 40 years. And then it's not even just those teams. There's been 10 games so far this season where teams were favored by at least 5.5 points. And in half of those games, the underdog won the game outright. So it's like half of the biggest, favorites of the season through 2 weeks have just flat out lost. Not to mention that they're actually like 9-1 against the spread, the underdogs in those 5.5 point games. So if you've been betting, if you've been taking underdogs this season, you've probably been winning some money. So it's just been one of those weeks, and like it's weird where we don't know going into Week 1, Week 2, even like who are the good teams, and we try to pick the good teams, and we think we know, but we don't. And I'm trying to like tell myself like, and maybe this will come back to bite me, and it's like maybe the first 2 weeks were a mirage, but like heading into Week 3, I'm trying to like look at it like, okay, from what I've seen, what teams have showed me that they're good so far, and I'm trying to like forget like what teams are supposed to be good and what teams are actually like showing that they're good, and that's kind of where just spinning it forward where I'm trying to think about as we head towards Week 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what's got to be done at this point. Now, I still will talk about the Manifesto in the context of suggesting picks where risk is mitigated, because
you can't throw out the Manifesto. It's 2 bad weeks. We gotta have faith.
Yeah, and that's the thing of it is, and that's the thing. Like I think I will continue to promote this because I really still do believe in it. And there's a lot of truth in it for anyone who's taken time to read the document at length online. There still is things that when you read it still makes perfect sense, because that's why it was written that way. So it was written, so it shall be picked is kind of how I'm going to continue to think here. But me personally, I have never lost in Week 2 of Survivor. Now, let me clarify that quickly for someone who might be listening to this and thinking that I'm lying. That's not to say before this past week that I had never lost in Week 1 either. I have lost in Week 1. Week 1 is, as I always say, certainly one of the toughest weeks I think to pick in Survivor. So I've lost in week 1 numerous times, but this honestly was the first time. I've never advanced in a Survivor pool and lost in week 2. And that's mainly, I attribute that to still continuing to go the route of saying, I just can't see this team being 0-2. But hey, there's a first for everything, I guess. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to walk away from the manifesto in its entirety. So going to go down the schedule here to a point and pick out some games that I like and continue and pick out some games that I like above others and try to talk through where risk can be mitigated and where risk can be found. But yeah, what a gut punch the week 2 was, especially for those who have been familiar with our conversations over the last 2 weeks. When I revealed last week that I survived week 1, basically with a mulligan, essentially, because I was late to log in. I had decided that I was going to stick with the Bengals, even though they did have some risk attached to them. But as we talked about in that week 1 podcast, I was going to go with them until I was late to the internet, and went with Seattle, which was my 1B to my 1A. Yeah, it kind of felt like a back-to-back Survivor losses, to be honest with you. But yeah, here we go for week 3, and around this time of year, we start to think a little bit about, okay, and it's only a little bit at this point, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a second, about bye weeks. And the reason it's only thought about a little bit right now is because there are no bye weeks in week 4. So that's how quickly we consider and then move past the bye week factor for this week, because there are no bye weeks for week 4, so we don't have to think about picking a team that could be already looking forward to its bye week. But for purposes of conversation, we can say okay, that's on the horizon for those who have survived the first 2 weeks with the picks that they have made. So that's just coming up on their horizon. When we get to this point, it's like you said, Zach, you kind of said it, pretty matter of factly, and it's kind of the be all, the end all to a certain extent. It's just like, okay, we have 2 weeks to see who's good and who's not so good, and who might stink. But one of those teams that stink, the Carolina Panthers, they are ushering in a veteran quarterback who's going to make a start, and is a team that we're not going to pick on. At least I'm not going to advocate picking on them, thereby picking the Raiders at home. And with that point, I will again highlight that we do, for those who follow the manifesto, we do suggest not inherently just saying I'm going to pick on losers. Although this year in week 3, after how the first 2 weeks went, it's a little bit harder to say that with conviction. But I'm still going to say it and suggest that people not go into this week saying I'm going to just pick against a team that looks like they're a total loser. Although I will put one caveat to that. There's one game that I really like in which the opponent does look like a total loser, and I'll get to that soon. But sometimes it is hard. It is impossible to avoid. But anyhow, so games that I'm just looking past are Thursday night games. So it's a good time to mention that we are recording this conversation on Wednesday evening. So I am not going to consider the Jets at home hosting the Patriots. Although part of me, actually probably a pretty significant part of me, wishes that game was not on Thursday. I would like to be able to at least consider that game a little bit more, but I'm not going to consider it because it's Thursday, and I just don't want to put, and I don't want to advocate anyone putting their Survivor future in the hands of this Thursday night game when there are a few other options to look at. So that being said, let me also say I'm not going to look at the Eagles Saints game. This is especially important, I think, for Philadelphia fans. Even if this game was in Philadelphia, I don't know if I would be expecting the Saints' potential bubble to burst against the Eagles, regardless of how bad that Eagles loss was and how angry that locker room probably is and wants to probably just whip someone's butt on Sunday. Conversation for another time. But I have real concerns about the leadership, of our Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm not advocating risking them to be the ones to burst the Saints bubble, especially in New Orleans. So I'm staying away from that game. I'm staying away from the Colts and the Bears. I'm staying away from the Niners and the Rams. I am staying away from the Cowboys hosting the Ravens because it's dangerous. That's the thing. Like the Ravens are really, really up against their season, falling to bits here. But I just, so in that game, I'd be inclined to pick them, and I'm not. I can't see picking them, depending on especially with right now with not any significant Cowboys out with injury. I will not be looking at the Lions and the Cardinals. I will not be looking at the Steelers and the Chargers. Steelers hosting the Chargers, I should say. Cardinals hosting the Lions. I will not be looking at the Titans hosting the Packers. I will not be looking at the Vikings hosting the Texans. So let's get the games, I guess, that I'm going to consider here. And again, as we sit here on Wednesday night, I will make an attempt to rank these games that I like by risk being mitigated. But I am glad that there's still time to think about it before Sunday. Let's just say that as we sit here on this week 3. Okay, so games that I kind of like a little bit, even though they're both a mess. The Browns hosting the Giants. And again, I like this game only a little bit in the sense that that I just feel like the Giants are the worst out of the bunch, and Cleveland's home, and it's a tough environment to play in, generally speaking. And but I'm not going to really focus on that too much. I'm not going to dismiss it. I am not going to dismiss the either of the Monday night games right now, because I think people are in a position where, depending on who you pick to get here, and just depending on how you tend to try to mitigate risk, winning at home, hosting at home on Monday night still carries a lot of weight in my mind, especially when you are at least a good team on paper, right? Because we can't call the Bengals a good team right now because they're 0-2. But as much as I almost hate to say it, because of how they've played, and certainly they've cost people in Survivor already, I think considering picking the Bengals and the Bills is a way to go right now. I mean, the Commanders and the Jaguars. The Commanders visiting Cincinnati and the Jaguars visiting the Bills definitely have to play with an edge because they're off to not so good starts here. But although the Commanders are 1-1, so that actually I think feeds into why I like Cincinnati a little bit over Buffalo here because Commanders are not a desperate team by any way, shape, or form. So that being said, I have a little bit more hesitancy to take the Bills because the Jaguars are desperate. But I don't know if their desperation is gonna over sway just how strong the Bills kind of look right now at home on Monday night. So I like those two. And I think I have one more game to mention, which is the game that I think that if I had to make my pick right now, I would take. And that is the Bucks hosting the Broncos. Bucks are just an upstart team playing with a lot of fire. They're 2-0 against going against 0-2, which definitely fits the mold of chasing a loser. And the Buccaneers are by no means, I don't think, going to be an elite team. I don't even know if there are elite teams this year. But so generally speaking, that Bucks Broncos matchup fits the mold of okay, don't chase a loser. The Buccaneers are certainly not going to win every game, and that's not just because hardly anybody wins every game, but the Buccaneers are just not going to win every game, and they could be primed for an upset here. But it's travel involved for the Broncos, and they just look so bad right now, and they're sticking with Nix, right? There's no reports that say that Nix is not going to be the starter. So that's the pick that I would take as we sit here right now. But as we get closer to Sunday, Like I said, that the Bengals and the Bills are definitely going to be in my wheelhouse of consideration, and to a lesser extent, the Browns. I probably talked myself out of the Browns as I was just hopefully not rambling here. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at this week. How about you?
I think I'm mostly on board with you. I will not be taking the Bengals as my official pick because I picked them week 1, as we've talked about. I think that's a top 3 pick on the board. I was really impressed by what I saw from the Bengals against the Chiefs. They were a pass interference call away from being 1-1. When you talk about teams you can't see being 0-3, I think the Bengals fit that absolutely. At home, primetime game. I think the Bengals are an awesome option for this week. Bucks are also in my top 3 in terms of ones that I've looked at. This Broncos team is brutal, and it's not just that. I think I've liked what I've seen from the Bucks so far. Bo Nix has had a couple very small moments, but like I think it's very like you could easily see him just giving away this game, and so even if it's a close game somehow, I don't trust Bo Nix right now, even if this game gets close. So Bucks are absolutely in my top 3. The one I was leaning towards, and I know you talked about this, maybe the magic of Andy Dalton does pay off. I'm leaning really hard towards the Raiders. I really like what I've seen from the Raiders. I thought that was like one of the best wins that I've seen. I mean, we talked about it with the Ravens week 2 with getting upset there, but that was a really impressive win. I know the NFL's crazy. I know these things happen, but when I just think about like, here's a team that like on the road in Baltimore beat the Ravens. Can I actually see them then following that up with a game at home against Carolina? That it wasn't just Bryce Young. It was the offensive line. It was the defense. Like the whole team has been terrible. Like maybe they do get a little bit of a bump for Andy Dalton, but like they need a really, really big bump from Andy Dalton to be good. And maybe like if you want to say, hey, like I don't know that I've seen enough from the Raiders to say, hey, I want to like risk my survivor in week 3 on them, but I feel like they've been playing really, really well. I feel like the way they've been utilizing Gardner Minshew, just like really quickly, like he doesn't throw it long, so let's just like have him real quick throw to Devontae Adams, throw to Brock Bowers, and just like move the ball that way down the field is I think made a lot of sense. I understand like the avoiding, like we've seen it. How many times have we seen like the backup quarterback comes in and just miraculously like pulls it out? Like that's the one thing that's given me any bit of hesitancy about picking the Raiders. So I think my pick, if I'm somebody who is alive because they haven't taken the Bengals yet, my Bengals would be my pick again. But as I'm not able to pick the Bengals, I'm going to try to stick with like only picking teams once during the season.
Yeah, that's fair.
I am torn between the Bucks and the Raiders. If you like what Joe said about the Bucks, go with them. If you're like hesitant about like maybe I don't want to go with the Bucks here, then I think the Raiders are also an awesome option.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, and it's with Dalton, it's not just that he's the backup, and the backup can spark a team. It's that he's a tenured backup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A quote unquote professional quarterback who.
Yeah, it wouldn't be out of nowhere for him to all of a sudden like this team to be better with him. Like, yeah. I think everybody expects it to happen.
Right, and that's the thing. It's I'm not suggesting that I think Carolina is going to win the game. It's just where can you see, the risk starting to mount up a little bit in certain examples versus others. And as far as games that I kind of wish that I liked a little bit more, as far as whether or not the team is home or away, or whether or not there's not an injury component. I feel like if the Texans and the Vikings, if that game was in Houston, I really, really would like to see, would have liked to have had the chance to pick Houston. Two teams that are both 2-0. One certainly does, it was expected to be a 2-0 team. One not, and no disrespect to the Vikings at all, because they have talent and a coaching staff that has proven to be able to win with basically anyone who they employ. But had that game been in Houston, I could definitely see that as prime for the Minnesota Vikings bubble to be bursted. Especially if it turns out that Justin Jefferson is not playing. So that the other game that I wish I liked a little bit better from an injury standpoint with the home team would be Seattle hosting the Miami Dolphins. Now, Seattle still is probably good enough to win that game, and I could certainly see that being a pick to advocate for. But I'm going to try to follow the same mantra that you're going with here, and they were my week 1 pick, so I'm going to try to avoid saying that I would take them here, because I'm trying to do the same thing you're doing, put myself in the seat of someone who's tracking their picks the entire way. But for those who have not taken Seattle, I could see considering that, but especially with the travel that Miami has to go through. But no, I feel
I
like
actually thought before I really started to dive into this, and just my first glance at the schedule, I thought my pick would be Seattle, just with the backup quarterback coming in. But we talked about this in the fantasy podcast, but I feel like the quarterback could maybe do just enough, and there's a really good supporting cast around him to the point where it wouldn't surprise me too much if the offense takes a tiny step back, but not a big step back. I do think this defense maybe isn't that great, so I do think Seattle wins the game. It's just Seattle is probably in my top 5 of games that I would like this week, but just didn't quite make it to one that I feel like I would be locking them in on.
Yeah, that's a thing that complicates the pick is especially if Walker is out. And we know that Charbonnet can keep that offense going. But Tyreek Hill, is the best football player on the field. So it's that guy can as we know can change a game in a number of ways, even if a quarterback is playing dreadfully. So that gives me a little bit of pause. But I'm sure folks are considering that game as well. Wish I felt that that the Rams could be so desperate that they could win against San Fran at home. But as desperate as they are, it's hard to expect any team to overcome the injuries that they have happening right now. But I think they'll stay in the game. That's why I would caution anybody who thinks that they can pick the Niners. I don't know that many people would think this, but if you're, again, people who might be just looking to chase against 0-2 squads or whatever, people who might have their algorithms for saving and stuff like that, if you're thinking that you can make a sneaky, quote-unquote sneaky pick with the Niners this week, I certainly wouldn't. And then,
division games I tend to avoid too. They always tend to be closer than we think. So, I agree. I can't imagine the Rams win this game, but I also would rather just avoid it if I can.
Yeah, that's certainly a point of reference too within the manifesto is try to avoid division games when you can. If the Ravens were home, maybe because of how desperate they are and they're healthy, right? They're healthy, they're desperate, but that's certainly a risk to think that they're going to go in there and win in Dallas when there's other options here to take. And Chiefs and Falcons, looking at the Sunday night game, because as we get deeper into the season, it will be convenient if it works out that we like Sunday night and Monday night games for the home team, because it's just a nice edge to have in your back pocket for picking Survivor. But even with the struggles or the injuries that the Chiefs have right now, or the main injury that they have right now in Pacheco, and the lightning in the bottle that the Falcons caught just not touching that game at all.
Yeah, this was another. If the Chiefs were home, I know that it feels like they're like might strike midnight on them one of these times. They just don't pull one out. But I think they win this game. And if it was if they were home, I with the Falcons coming off that kind of just crazy win, coming down from that, I wouldn't feel too confident about the Falcons. And I still don't. But yeah, I'm when I can, I'm trying. There's too many home teams I like this week to go with the Chiefs on the road.
Yep. So I think that actually covers the schedule. We didn't really talk much about the Colts and the Bears, which is certainly an intriguing game with Indy being 0-2 at home against a Chicago Bears team that, even though their defense has played well, probably a little overrated headed into the season and is kind of primed for a loss. But I don't know that the Colts have looked so. I have looked good enough to think that something quirky can't happen there against a good defense and a team that even if they end up being with only 3 or 4 wins when the year is all said and done, they don't believe. I'm sure they don't believe themselves to be a 3 or 4 win team. So, certainly would not really venture to consider that game at all. And again, just to kind of come full circle. The Jets-Patriots game. I'm curious on your thoughts, though, there, because I kind of opened up my my likes and dislikes as far as the week goes, saying that I wish the Jets were hosting on another day, just to possibly consider them. Where would you have any? It's completely hypothetical because they're playing on Thursday, but how do you feel about that statement? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Going back to the division thing, I didn't really consider them all that strongly because of the division game aspect. Patriots have played better than I've expected this year, and the Jets have honestly been worse than I've anticipated. So, if I'm picking heads up, yes, I'm picking the Jets. But yeah, I didn't think too strongly about them.
All right, so that's what we've got for our likes and dislikes for Survivor. Good luck to those still surviving here in Week 3. Let's move to the 3 games. 3's a big number here for us tonight, Zach. Let's move to the 3 games that you like as far as betting purposes go.
Yeah, so I was 2-1 last week, so up to 5-1 on the season so far. So it's been a good start. With all the craziness, somehow I've benefited from it. So just betting wise. So I talked about it earlier. Even if it doesn't end up being my final Survivor pick. Raiders minus 5.5 against Carolina. I think I talked about how the offense has been rolling so far. Just the problems that I've seen from the Panthers beyond just the quarterback. So I think there's a very good chance that we see more of this with the Panthers just really getting blown out again. So I'll take the Raiders minus 5.5 here against Carolina. We just touched on this game a little bit ago, but Chicago and Indianapolis, I'm going to take actually under 43.5. I was surprised that this number is as high as it is because I feel like the Bears offense has really, really struggled, and Indy really hasn't looked much better on offense. And honestly, both these defenses have really excelled. So especially that Bears. So hopefully we don't get any Bears pick sixes or special teams touchdowns here. But under 43.5 is my second pick with the Bears and the Colts, and then the Commanders and Bengals. I'm going to go over 46.5 for them. Both those offenses looked really, really good last week. Washington was playing New York Giants, so I might be on board with you. If it wasn't for Carolina, the Giants might be the worst team in the league, but still. And to go along with that, Washington has had one of the worst pass defenses in the league this year. They had one of the worst last year, and I talked about how I've been pretty impressed by what I saw from the Bengals passing offense last week. So they look like they've got things kind of figured out there. So maybe it's mostly the Bengals that are doing the scoring. I know we talked about how we think they're going to win this game, but still, if we can get a lot of points from the Bengals, I think the Washington can do their part, and we can get over 46.5 here. So my 3 picks for the week are Raiders minus 5.5 against Carolina, the under in Chicago and Indy, and the over in Washington and Cincinnati.
Great. Good luck to you, and good luck to everyone else on the gambling fronts this weekend. For Zach Tertel, I'm Joe Dara. Jabronis signing off. We'll talk to you next week.